You know exactly what your life could look like, and that's why it hurts so much to live the way you do now. There is a quiet pain that comes from feeling destined for more, yet watching yourself do nothing, as if some invisible hand keeps pulling you back into the same patterns. You tell yourself tomorrow will be different, that motivation will show up when you're ready, that you just need a little more time, but deep down you know the truth. Time isn't the problem, potential isn't the problem. The problem is something inside you that learned, long ago, to freeze when the moment to rise finally arrives. You feel it every day, a strange mix of ambition and paralysis, a feeling of greatness and guilt living inside the same body, the same mind, the same breath. You've carried this tension for so long that it almost feels normal. The dreams you hold aren't childish fantasies. They're real, they're sharp, they're persistent, they follow you everywhere, whispering what your life could be if you ever got out of your own way. And yet there's a heaviness in you that keeps pulling you back down, a quiet voice that says, not now, not today, maybe later, and sometimes you believe it. Sometimes you let it win. Sometimes you convince yourself that avoiding the life you want is safer than reaching for it. But let's be honest for a moment, the reason you do nothing isn't because you're lazy. It's because you've been shaped by experiences that taught you to fear your own power. You've been conditioned slowly, quietly, through years of emotional pressure, to play small even when something inside you wants to break out. And that conditioning didn't come from nowhere. Someone taught you to hesitate. Someone taught you to second guess your voice, your choices, your worth. Someone made you feel like wanting more was selfish or unrealistic or too much for the world to accept. This is where dark psychology enters your story, whether you realized it or not. Because when you were younger, maybe not in age, but in confidence, someone used your sensitivity against you. Maybe they didn't scream, maybe they didn't hit, maybe they didn't say anything obvious at all, but silence can be just as sharp as words. Small comments can carve deep wounds. Quiet disapproval can shape a person's entire inner world. Emotional withdrawal, guilt, subtle blame, the coldness of someone you needed, they all leave scars you carry into adulthood. And those scars show up in your ambition. They show up in the moments when you're right at the edge of momentum and suddenly freeze. They show up when you start something new, and an unexplained wave of dread hits you. They show up every time you're about to grow, succeed, or take a step forward, and an old voice whispers, what if you fail? What if you embarrass yourself? What if you're not enough? But here's the part most people never talk about. That voice isn't yours. It was planted in you. It was conditioned into you by emotional patterns you didn't choose. Maybe through manipulation, maybe through inconsistent affection, maybe through toxic relationships where someone made you feel responsible for their emotions. Maybe through trauma bonding that rewired your nervous system to equate love with fear and validation with compliance. This is dark psychology in its softest form, the kind that doesn't break you loudly, but quietly trains you to doubt yourself so deeply that you start rejecting your own potential. Think about how often you blame yourself for things that were never your fault. Think about how easily you take responsibility for people who hurt you. Think about how quickly you forgive someone who never apologized because you'd rather keep the peace than confront the truth. This is what happens when emotional abuse becomes normal. This is what happens when guilt is used as a leash. This is what happens when your heart learns that survival depends on silence, and that silence follows you into your dreams. It makes you hesitate. It makes you procrastinate. It makes you freeze in front of the life you want because deep down, you were conditioned to believe that stepping into your power will cost you something. Love, acceptance, safety, connection. Your inaction isn't laziness, it's self-protection. It's the mind choosing the familiar pain of stagnation over the unpredictable pain of growth. You've been manipulated without realizing it, not in a dramatic movie way, in the subtle ways that shape human behavior without ever being spoken. Someone controlled you through disappointment. Someone taught you to earn affection by shrinking. Someone trained you to overthink every step until taking action felt dangerous. That's why you stay still. That's why you do nothing. Not because you don't care, but because your nervous system learned that ambition equals risk. And the part that hurts the most is that you know you're capable of more. You feel it every day. It's not ambition. It's identity. Something in you knows you were meant to rise, to build, to create, to break cycles, to become someone the world hasn't seen yet. That's why the pain is so sharp. It's the ache of unrealized potential, the ache of a person trapped under old programming that was never meant for them. But here's the truth you've needed to hear. You are not broken. You are conditioned, and conditioning can be undone. When you understand the psychology behind your hesitation, something shifts inside you. You stop treating yourself like a failure and start seeing the patterns that shaped you. Patterns of manipulation, patterns of emotional control, patterns of guilt that kept you quiet, patterns of trauma bonding that made you loyal to people who never valued you, patterns of mind games that slowly turned your confidence into caution. Once you see these patterns, you can break them. You can learn to separate your voice from the voices that shaped you. You can learn to recognize red flags before they become wounds. You can rebuild the boundaries you were never allowed to have. You can reclaim your self-worth piece by piece, moment by moment, choice by choice. And this is where everything begins to change, not because you suddenly become motivated, but because you finally understand why you weren't. You stop fighting yourself. You stop seeing your inaction as weakness. You see it for what it truly was: survival, a response to emotional abuse, a consequence of dark psychology, a defense mechanism rooted in the fear of losing love or safety if you ever dared to step into your power. But now you're older, stronger, more aware, and the chains that once held you aren't as strong as they used to be. You can feel them loosening every time you choose honesty over guilt, boundaries over people, pleasing, growth over comfort. You can feel the old programming cracking every time you decide that your life belongs to you, not to the people who shaped your fears. And slowly, something inside you wakes up. The part of you that remembers who you were before doubt was taught to you. The part that understands dark psychology not as a threat, but as a map. The part that sees manipulation clearly, emotional abuse clearly, toxic relationships clearly. The part that no longer runs from its own potential, but protects it fiercely. You start choosing yourself, not out of arrogance, but out of survival. You start rebuilding trust in your voice, your intuition, your identity. You start recognizing that your hesitation was never a flaw. It was a warning sign that you needed healing. And healing doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's as simple as taking one step without waiting for permission. One choice that scares you. One moment where you refuse to shrink. And with every step, you reclaim what was taken from you. You reclaim your courage, your ambition, your inner power, the part of you that knew, even in silence, that you were destined for more. And now you're finally ready to move, not because you're no longer afraid, but because you've learned to walk with fear instead of letting it control you. You've learned to see your past without letting it dictate your future. You've learned to break the patterns that once trapped you. You've spent years waiting for the perfect moment, but the truth is simple. The moment you understand yourself is the moment you become unstoppable. And that moment is now, because the life you want is still waiting for you. The strength you need is already inside you. And the version of you who rises finally, fully, completely begins with a single choice, a quiet decision, a slow breath, a step forward, and now the story of your life begins to change.